Okay guys, so I wanted to start a series of shorter articles than what I'm currently doing. And the topic I've picked for that is JavaScript. So I'm going to, over the next month, release some short JavaScript tutorials. And I'm going to start with this one today, which isn't actually talking about the JavaScript itself. It's more talking about the very common issue that we see with optimization of our pages, and the fact that we see a lot of information through optimization plugins about deferring, delaying, all that sort of stuff. And I just want to talk about what that actually means and what effect it actually has. Now, I found this article here on logrocket.com, and it's actually a really good article. So I'm going to link to this. I've scrolled down to the section about defer and async to do with JavaScript. Above that, they're talking about some CSS, etc., which is not the topic here. So you often see these two keywords used with JavaScript. There's a third term we're seeing with optimization, which is delay, which is not a browser construct. So some tools like WP Rocket and Perf Matters and many others have a delay JavaScript execution feature. And what they're doing is they're stopping JavaScripts from loading externally, and they wait for user interaction on the page, and then they instruct the browser to load those scripts. So that's not actually a native browser feature. It is just a bit of code which is stripping out those JavaScripts which would normally load and then loading them after the user's interacted with the page or after a timeout. So we're just going to talk about here about the defer and async. Now, so one thing I just wanted to add to this video, I forgot to add in my original recording. If we look at this page here that I'm using as my reference, I noted as I was going through the DOM that they're not doing the kind of things that they're recommending. And here's where it makes a difference. If we look at PSI on their URL, it's failing all the core web vitals. And the performance is showing as a 20 down here. I'm not a big fan of PSI, particularly for mobile. Desktop, it's still not great. It still fails on desktop, and it's pretty easy to actually get it working well on desktop. We're getting a fairly low score on desktop as well. But let's have a look at the mobile to really highlight what we're talking about here. And the main thing I'm talking about here is the unused JavaScript and the eliminate render blocking resources. If you look in here, there's quite a bit of this. With first is the CSS, most of these CSS, and then we've got some JavaScript here, which is render blocking. So these add to the render blocking. We're only going to talk about the JavaScript side of stuff in this video, but this is exactly what we're talking about, and using techniques like defer and async, or even delay if you're using something like Perf Matters or Rocket. But this is what we're actually going to be talking about. Now, if I look at this, even this page as an example, so this page here is made up of HTML. So if we look at the source, we end up with a document type, HTML, head, bunch of metadata, some prefetching to speed up connections to some domains. We've got some links here, we've got some script here. If I look for the body tag, it's all the way down here at 1743. So everything above that, all those lines there are loading fonts, CSS, JavaScripts, all that sort of stuff is all loading up here. Now that is what they call render blocking scripts and styles, because it has to stop at this point when it's rendering the page and execute the JavaScript. We'll just talk about the JavaScript before it continues on to the next point. So that's called render blocking. Now, ideally, what you want to do is try and move all that to the end. So if we look down the bottom of this document, we go to further up here, find it. Wow. It's a big DOM. Somewhere up here. Well, around here, 2643, we've got the last div making up all of this HTML on this page. From there down, we've got some JavaScripts, and I think there's some styles in there as well, but there's a bunch of JavaScript mostly. And that's actually okay because it's just before the closing body, and it is after everything else that needs to be rendered is already on the page. That's okay for those to run there because they're not blocking the rendering of that page. So what a very common thing to do is to use defer and async. So let's go right up to the top here again. Look at some of these scripts here. So if I went to this script here, I'm loading this jQuery library from that URL. There is no defer or async on this, which means that the browser stops, waits for that to load, executes it, and then moves on to the next point. Okay, so there's your render blocking. If you add the keyword defer to it, really interesting thing happens. What it does, even though you've got it at this part of the DOM, it actually takes it out of there and it sticks it at the end of the rendering cycle. And what it does, actually the description they give here is that it instructs the browser to download the script in the background and not block the rendering of the page. And then the deferred script will execute when the DOM is ready, but just before the DOM content loaded event. Okay, so with defer, what it does, it moves everything to the end of the rendering, but it still respects the order. So if you've got these two scripts here that you're deferring, and script 2 relies on script 1, this will work because script 2 will not execute until script 1 has loaded. So that works. So that's one way of doing it. Now the other way of doing it is using the async keyword. Now async just means download it and whenever it's ready, execute it. So if you've got these two here in an order and script number 4 downloads quicker than script number 3, this one's going to run first. So if this one relies on that one, you're going to get a JavaScript error in the console. So the kind of things that really should be async, things like Google Analytics, things like Hotjar, if they're async, they will download and run whenever they're ready, and they're not going to cause any render blocking, and they're not reliant on any other scripts. So asyncing libraries like that makes absolute sense. Whereas if you've got things, for example, if you're trying to defer some of your Elementor or bricks or whatever code to the end of the render cycle, you're going to need to use defer because one script might rely on another. So for example, if this is the Elementor script that loads, but the WP API hasn't loaded, then this script is going to fail because it needed that one to load first. Hopefully it makes sense. So yeah, so that's the reason we use async and defer. So hopefully that is some value to you. I think the next one I'm going to talk about is actually the difference between ES6 and older JavaScript. What you need to know, I'm not going to go into all the detail, just the basic differences that make ES6 amazing and why you should be using it wherever possible, in my opinion. So I'm going to end this here, and I hope this is good value for you. If this is more the kind of thing you want to see from me, let me know. Like, subscribe, and put something in the comments to let me know that this is what you actually want.